Good evening and welcome to Northshire Bookstore. My name is Davith Wood. I'm the events manager at our Manchester, Vermont location, and I'm here as often with my good friend and colleague Rachel Person, the events manager in our Saratoga Springs location. She's going to get things started with our authors in just a second, but a few things first. Please, at any point this evening, if you have any questions, type it into the Q&A box. We'll store them up and we'll pose them for you when we get to the end of this evening's event. And finally, just a note of thanks. An independent book selling is not easy in the best of times, and it's not been the best of times for the last couple years. So we really owe our existence to your support. So thanks so much, Rachel.
Thank you, David, and thanks everyone for being here. I'm so happy to get to welcome these guests to our screens this evening. Priyanka Champaneri is with us today to talk about her debut novel, The City of Death, which received the 2018 Restless Books Prize for New Immigrant Writing, was shortlisted for the Center for Fiction First Novel Prize, and has been getting rave reviews in publications including the New York Times, Booklist, and the Los Angeles Review of Books, as well as from Northshire's booksellers. She received her MFA in creative writing from George Mason University and has been a fellow at the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts numerous times. She'll be interviewed tonight by award-winning radio host, podcaster, musician, and editor Elia Einhorn, who hosts shows on Sonos Radio Hour and Pitchfork Radio, and is the creator of the Sober 21 zine. Please join me in welcoming them both to Northshire Bookstore.
Hello, hello. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everybody at Northshire, for having us. We're super stoked. And
yes.
Elliot, thank you for doing this.
Are you? This is. I've been waiting for this excuse to go deep on this novel, to go deep on the city with you, and this is just given me a reason to nerd out. This is great. I needed this. Thank you for asking me.
Oh my God, it's gonna be awesome. I'm so excited.
So Priyanka, I was thinking, well, first of all, I want to say I picked this background especially for this talk because, and I'll move for a moment so you can see here, this is a beautiful woven piece by a family of farmers and weavers in Varanasi that was gifted to me by this young guy I met there who's this really great tour guide and also a silk merchant, Prakash Gaud. So I thought, and he sent it to me recently as a gift, and I thought I've got to put this up as our background to put us in the right city here.
I love it, and you've mentioned him to me a bunch of times. I know you have this whole virtual tour thing that he does.
I do.
You sent me so many vids.
Yeah, I'm so obsessed with Varanasi that I have a virtual tour guide since I haven't been able to get back there because of the pandemic. But I'm going again late September. I actually think this leads us sort of nicely into the first question. And I do want to give one piece of setup for viewers who may not be familiar with Varanasi, the city. It goes by a couple different names. So there's Varanasi, which is the modern name. There's Banaras, which is maybe the middle name, and then the earliest name is Kashi. And so I have a feeling that you and I will be switching out. I find that it sort of changes according to context, which name I use, and I wonder if you do the same.
Yeah, no, I totally do. I find myself mostly using Banaras, but for the book, it was entirely Kashi, because when you look at like sacred scriptures and texts and stuff, that's how the city is referred to. And it actually took me many years to realize they were the same thing. It wasn't until I started doing my research where I was like, oh, I've heard of Kashi. I know that. Like, I just had never seen it as Banaras or Varanasi, like within those sacred texts, but they were all exactly the same.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, with three names for one of the most amazing cities I've ever been to. So how did you first kind of come to know and love Varanasi, Priyanka? This is something I've been wondering about because, of course, your novel is based there. It is the City of Death.
Well, so this leads up into one of the reasons I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, Elia, because for folks out there, Elia has actually physically been to this city and has fallen in love with it. And he mentioned he's even going to be going back again, hopefully sometime in the coming months. I have never physically been to this city. I have never set foot there. I've been to India a couple of times, only ever as a tourist, but never to that specific city. And so how do you go from never physically being in a place or seeing a place to deciding you're going to write an entire, very long novel about it? It wasn't something that I took lightly at all. I felt a lot of apprehension in the beginning about doing it. And what led me, the thing that kind of opened up the beginnings of that wormhole, rabbit hole for me was that a friend of mine had sent me this link to a Reuters article that was all about the death hostels, which, as you know, the book is set primarily in a death hostel, this place where somebody can bring their family member who's on the verge of dying to die there, so they have the benefit of a death in the holiest city in the world, according to Hinduism. That I knew about Banaras. I'd always known about Banaras for a very, very long time, just as something like, people in Western cultures, they know about Jerusalem, or, Muslims know about Mecca, that kind of thing. So I knew about it in that way, but never thought about it. And then I read this article about the death hostels, and I was like, wait, what? Wait, what is that? Like, what is happening there? Because it was referring to these places in such a dry, practical, matter-of-fact manner that they weren't anything extraordinary at all. And if you grew up within that culture, it wouldn't be anything extraordinary at all. It would just be like a motel, like, you're going on a road trip and you need a place to stay. It's nothing more than that. But I had grown up in the United States. So while I was steeped within Eastern philosophy, I equally understood a Western perspective where something like that was really extraordinary. So that was the initial hook, but never thought I would write anything actually set there. I just started doing my own research because I was like, this hostel thing is so incredibly interesting. Let me see what I can find. And let's just for I'm one of those people who just has a lot of curiosities and a lot of hobbies. And some of them I follow through to the end. Most of them peter out and die within a couple of weeks.
Sure.
This one stuck through movies and books and magazines and news articles, documentaries, like just books of photography. I was just drinking in so much about this city and still feeling a lot of apprehension about ever writing anything about it at all. I was bringing my own baggage to the table, and that I'm Indian, but my parents are not from that specific part of India. It's a very different part. They're from Gujarat. I wasn't born and raised in India. And yet I was writing a book about people who were and are, and just this choice to write about a city that is incredibly iconic and important within this culture. And it felt like appropriation to me, for me to just come in and decide to take strange ownership over it. And who was I to do that? But in the end, the reason I gave myself permission to do that is the book just arrived in my head. I didn't have a choice. These characters just started walking around in my head. So I would be sitting reading something, and then I would all of a sudden hear this snippet of dialogue between two characters. And then I would be like, well, who are they? What are they talking about? What are they doing right now? Like that's whatever they're saying is really interesting. And it wasn't just one instance. It would just keep happening at random intervals with random people. So you're an artist, Elia. You can't pass up the muse in whatever form or shape.
You can't pass up the muse.
That muse arrived.
Sure.
Because the muse might not ever come back again. you gotta take whatever the muse gives you, and you gotta run with it. And I will say, in doing all these kinds of events and kind of parsing and analyzing again my own choices about what I decided to do, because I am somebody who looks at books where the author is by somebody who is outside of the culture that they are writing about, especially now. I do approach those books with a healthy amount of skepticism. And so I thought folks might approach my book with that skepticism, rightfully so. So it took figuring out, well, where did I fit within this world? Was I totally an outsider? And the way I came to it was that, well, I've been steeped in Hinduism my entire life. So that is something where I feel very confident about my foothold there. I'm somebody who tries to practice it in my daily life and has also just an eye for how that religion operates. So that's something I can write about confidently. And even though I had never been to that specific city, through my various travels in India, and I'm sure you know this too, there are things about the country, as massive as it is and as multicultural and as polyglot as it is, that are always the same. Things like the marketplace and the goats in the street and the textiles hanging everywhere, and like the smells and just like the way people gossip around the tea stall and just all of that is
The
always
noise, yeah.
the noise, the glorious, glorious noise, and
It's
then the
amazing.
pockets
Yeah.
of silence that you'll also
Mhm.
find as well. So I was able to grasp everything that I had held inside from my travels, also grasp onto my knowledge of Hinduism, and also grasp the third thing, which is that, I am Indian. I might be Indian American,
Mhm.
but I am Indian. And so I'm intimately familiar with Indian familial structures and the social etiquette surrounding that. Those were the three things I had. And that is what I built this book out of, combined with everything that the muse was populating in my head.
It strikes me as sort of an interesting thing that you were so worried about, um, maybe maybe offending is not quite the right word, but I'll use it for lack
No,
of
I was,
another
I
one right
was,
now.
yeah.
But you've actually become a cultural emissary for this city that I think a lot of people in the West maybe didn't know about, in a very powerful way. So you've actually done the city a service, I think,
Which
on a
is a
couple of
huge,
different levels.
it's a huge compliment. And I will tell you, but we should talk later about how you and I connected, which is via Instagram, because also via
Yeah, let's
Instagram,
talk about this. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, but also via Instagram, I think the biggest compliment or the biggest piece of validation I got was not any reviews, any prizes, anything. It was from somebody who was born and raised and lived in Banaras and read this book and then found out that I had never been to the city, and she couldn't believe it. So she sent me this
Mhm.
message to tell me this, and she even sent me this picture she had taken where she's holding the Indian edition of the book up and the Ganga River
Oh,
is in the
wow.
back with the boats and everything. And I read
How
that and
powerful is
I
that?
sent it to my editor, to my agent, and I was like, I feel this is the validation I needed. I'm good now. I'm totally good.
That's amazing. Well, I will say, I was shocked when I realized that you hadn't been there because you paint it in such vivid strokes that I felt like I was back on those small lanes in the old city. I really felt like I was there. And I caught one of your talks, something like this that you had done around the hardcover edition, and I was floored when you said that. I was absolutely floored. I mean, you captured it down to the most minute detail, so it was, uh, very well done in that way.
I think
Yeah,
you
we
mentioned that. Yeah, when you initially reached out to me on Instagram, I think that you mentioned that when you DM'd me. And it was just this
mhm.
lovely, lovely note you sent me where you just told me all about that and invited me to be in your book club, which I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, that sounds cool. Sure.
Yeah, so for the viewers, my wife came across a galley copy of this book and knew that I was obsessed with Varanasi, and she said, "I think you're going to enjoy this novel. You should check it out." And I read. I couldn't put it down. I put everything else on hold, all my responsibilities on hold, and I just powered through it. And I was very moved by it, and I DM'd Priyanka to say, this is first of all, it's brought me straight back to Varanasi, which was which is such a huge city in my life. And second of all, it helped me with a relationship in my own family that I've been having some trouble with over the last few years, and and the relationship between the the Prasad cousins in the book. In some ways paralleled this. There were some parallels that were very powerful and that actually got me thinking about actions I wanted to take in that relationship that I did consequently take. So that was a very powerful thing that the book gave me right there. But yeah, you ended up joining the book club. I run this music book club with a bunch of bands and people in the music industry, and it's been so fun having you. We read Michelle Zauner's book,
Yeah.
Crying in
Crying.
H Mart. We read
Yeah.
a bunch.
Yeah.
But this is not about the book club. This is about your book. So I want to ask you about I want to go right to the opening because there's this brief one-page open that you do before part one.
Yeah.
And starting right in the second line, it sort of invites readers into Kashi and it gives instructions on how to navigate a specific ghat. And the ghats, for the viewers who aren't familiar, are these gorgeous really old steps that go down from the old city to the Ganga River, to the river Ganges, and they're a place where people go to bathe, to sell their wares, to worship, to do yoga, to
To your
to
laundry.
gossip, to hang
Yeah.
out, to do laundry. Yeah, it's everything. It's a lifeline for the city in a lot of ways, and you bring us there right away. And it has this wonderful way of drawing the reader into the city. I wonder how you decided on that open.
So, it's interesting construction wise. So the thing that Elia is referring to, the book is divided up into 5 parts, and each part starts with this italicized story, which perhaps seemingly in the beginning seems like it has nothing to do with the main narrative at all. But hopefully by the end, the reader has made those connections about how it does have something to do with it. And initially that thread wasn't structured in that way. It was instead structured so it was just running throughout the entire narrative. And, this book was rejected by literally every single publisher in the United States, in the UK, many in Canada, many in India. One of the comments that my agent and I were kind of wrestling with and trying to figure out why this rejection was coming about was perhaps there was too much going on within the narrative, but I couldn't let go of that story. I like to think of myself as pretty amenable as a writer. I'm really open to any kind of criticism and just trying things out because you never know. But the only thing I was absolutely firm with is I am not letting go of that narrative thread, because whether it worked or not, I wanted it there. It was a big part of the story for me. It connects back to a bunch of other characters, and it was really important to me. So the way I finally decided to figure out how to make it so maybe it wasn't confusing, but it's not buried in there, but to still have it there was to lift it out and then instead place it at the beginning. So, all these wonderful things that you said about it, entirely coincidental to the choice to just how to manage it structurally, and
That's
just
interesting.
offset it. And now when I look back at it, it's one of my favorite things about the book, because I don't think I do very many radical things in terms of writing a novel. I don't think I'm like one of those experimental people with this book, but this to me seems like, for me anyway, as a writer, it does seem something that is different structurally that I haven't seen before. And yet it ties into that theme of storytelling that was just so much on my mind and in my heart as I was writing this book, this culture of constant storytelling and how it influences your daily life. Of course, there had to be another story like that, within the book as well. So in terms of opening the book, it's funny, I never really thought about that, positioning the reader on the Ghat as if they've just entered the city and, they're getting a tour from somebody. I'd never thought of it that way, but you're right. And now I guess I'll just tell people, sure, that was entirely intentional.
That's free. That one's on the house. You can use that whenever you need. No, but I love the way the vignette functions, because it's almost like the ginger between different sushi rolls, because some of the chapters are really heavy, right?
Yeah.
And then it comes in and it brings you to a new place momentarily and back in time, and it sort of refreshes you for the next piece. I love the way that functions.
A palate cleanser, Elia?
Well, a palate cleanser would imply a sort of negativity, about which I don't want to, but no, it's a big book and it's a heavy book. You know what I mean? There's a lot of joy in it, and there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of sorrow, and not to say that those vignettes don't also have the same qualities, but it sort of brings an active, oftentimes maybe like a magic realism, or something that puts you in a different headspace. I wonder, actually, along this line, how did you decide to include the supernatural as totally normal alongside the sort of empirical world of the city?
So this perhaps, categorizes myself as a certain kind of person, but I don't think anything that I wrote about in this book is something that's not possible in our current reality. I really believe that I don't know. It is within the realm of possibility. Certainly, you know, on my travels to India, I would hear these two old dudes sitting on the veranda of their house, like, you know, chewing pan, telling these like incredible stories like this, but like they would get to this part that in the story that was very, very fantastical and then just skip right over it and then go to the rest of it. Like, you know, so-and-so was on his way to the market and he met this talking snake and he said hello. And then he continued on his way to the market. Like the fantastical element isn't even the point of the story. It's just, it's just this thing that happens. And I've always loved that. Loved it in fairy tales, which I've been obsessed with since I was a kid. And I don't know if you're familiar with the whole huge set that's edited by Andrew Lang, which is like the green fairy book, the blue, the orange.
No.
There are these fairy tales from all over the world. And the one commonality with all of them is just this easy coexistence of the fantastical with the everyday. The fantastical is never explained. It's just there. It's part of that reality.
It's part of the world. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's not even the point. Like the point is not to explore how or why this is possible. It's just something that's there and the story's moving forward with its own trajectory. And I just wanted to do that. You know, certainly Salman Rushdie does it. Certainly like a lot of other, you know, I think Indian writers are often like pegged with magical realism, but I mean, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, there are so many writers who kind of claim that as their territory. But I just love books like that, I think, because I'm just always looking for magic. Right? Like I'm looking for magic in the world. And as like we just progress at this incredibly fast rate, technology wise, like in all aspects, we're making great strides, especially when you think about the things that we've done medically. I mean, we created a COVID vaccine in what, like, you know, 18 months, like that's insane. But with every stride, I feel like we're also erasing the possibility of magic, of the unknown, of the unexplainable. And the supernatural feels like the last bastion where you could talk about something that's unexplainable or magic and not sound like you're completely cracked, right? Like there are like, you know, there is like this cohort of people where, you know, perhaps they believe in it in varying degrees, but there is some sort of acknowledgement of something that we cannot explain. And I love that because I feel like it's just this huge expanse of possibility to acknowledge that, no, we don't know everything that's going on. And in terms of like in my book and how I wanted it to manifest, I wanted it to be like, it could not be hokey. Like, you know, I knew I had to be very careful in how I was having the supernatural presence manifest itself. Which I don't think it's a spoiler for people out there. It happens in the washroom of this death hostel and it manifests itself in the form of these brass water pots that just start kind of clanging around. And there's a consistency to how it happens. And I find that
every night, 2 a.m. Yeah.
Yep. And I find that to be, and there's also a consistency in how it stops and who is able to stop it. And I find all of that actually quite terrifying. The fact that it happens in the most utilitarian part of a household, the fact that it abides by its own rules, that seems to me terrifying because we move through the world with this understanding of how the world works. And then when something comes along and it subverts that, what's more terrifying than that?
Well, you definitely have throughout in the flashbacks to the Prasad cousins' youth, there's things that subvert it that are man-made situations, maybe, or you know, done by humans. And then, like you say, at the death hostel at the Bhavan, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I hope.
Bhavan, yeah.
At Shankar Bhavan, this ghost occupies the washroom. So I wanted to ask you about this. Why the washroom? And why the brass pots? Now, are these brass pots, you mentioned in the book at one point that these are the pots that during the death rites, which in Varanasi happen mostly at Manikarnika Ghat, where there's a public cremation ground, and bodies are washed in the river Ganges before cremation. You mentioned in the book at one point that these pots are used to wash the family. But I also understand, like, is this a washroom in the Western sense also? Is this like the bathroom? Because you know how there's like wet rooms that sometimes include a toilet and sometimes don't in India.
Yeah.
I wondered if in your concept, I thought of it as the bathroom, right? And the
Yeah.
storage area for these pots. So why there?
And that's how I was envisioning it too. Like basically, essentially,
Okay.
the bathroom, not like with showers or anything, because they wouldn't have that, but like all of the
Hmm.
squat toilets, if they had plural or at least
Exactly.
one,
Yeah.
and just the place where they keep the water pots, which are not used for cooking, they're purely for bathing. So like the women guests would be able to take one when they go down to the river to be able to fill it and bathe themselves, et cetera, et cetera, and then also bring water back in order to be bathing the dead. In terms of why it was the washroom, that was one of those decisions I made early on, where you might already know this about me, Elia, but I'm an organic writer. So I
Mm,
had no idea where the book was going when I started. The book
I
started
love
off,
that.
I knew there was a death hostel. I knew there was this manager. I didn't know anything else. And then, so I'm writing and this dead body shows up in the river in the very beginning. Okay, something has to happen with this dead body. What happens next? It's this constant, what happens next? What happens next? At some point, I made the decision to have a supernatural manifestation. And at some point, I made the decision to have it in the washroom. But it
Mm,
wasn't anything more intentional than that. I will tell you in hindsight, years and years and years later, now, like more than a decade later, I really love that that's where it is. Because again, it's
hmm.
arguably the most utilitarian room in a household, right? It's not a glamorous room at all, but every house has to have some sort of washroom. And then the thing with the pots, I mean, there's pots all throughout the book. There's brass
Hmm.
water pots and clay water
Right.
pots, and they're
Right.
they're everywhere, and they serve different
It's a
purposes.
through line in the past and in the present. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there is one concrete example that comes back to that, but I almost thought, and this may just be me as the son of a psychologist thinking too much about this, but I have a 5-year-old daughter, Conway, and so we spend a lot of time talking about the bathroom and potty trained. Like
Yeah.
she's potty
Yeah.
trained, but like
Yeah.
she still needs help, and
Yeah.
or she's turning 5 next couple weeks, I should say. She's 4 now. So I kind of thought there was a Freudian element to this, sort of like the sort of metaphorical shit that exists in our lives, and that sometimes it comes up from the past. I wondered if there was
Well, there's a
yeah,
character though, right, who has to deal with some very literal shit. So
exactly,
in the
exactly,
form of this
yeah.
gastrointestinal distress and I will tell you, we had talked earlier about like how we wanted this conversation to go. I forgot to mention, nobody ever wants to talk about Mohan and what he's going through. And I don't
Oh,
know
that's
if
funny.
that's like Western, like just being buttoned up about bodily functions. Cause like I find in Eastern societies, it's like, oh, like you've had diarrhea, you poor thing. Like here's like 5 different like home remedies that can help you out. Like
Hmm.
it's a very, very matter of factness
It's not
about
a shameful thing. Yeah.
exactly, right? Like it's your body and this is what your body does. Um, so yeah, but poor Moen dealing with his own very literal shit throughout. I mean, it's an interesting analysis, and now I want to think about it a little bit more too.
There you go. There you go. I'm glad I've given you something to chew on over the next couple of weeks. I did want to talk to you. Something you and I have bonded on is our shared love of certain music. And of course, Banaras is this famous music city over there. It's one of the biggest sort of citadels of Indian classical music. Ravi Shankar was from there. It was a name, of course, that even across America and the West, is revered and very well known. And a lot of famous Bollywood films are shot there, including music numbers. And I sort of I wondered, Priyanka, like what role music played for you in the writing of this book and in your conception of the city.
Yeah. I think for me, there's always some sort of soundtrack kind of like subliminally playing in my head. Very often, very, very underlying, just kind of very, very humming away. And then sometimes it might rise to a pitch, but like when there's characters talking, it's just kind of in the background a little bit. And I was incredibly lucky because I grew up with a father who is an amateur expert on Indian classical music, just absolutely
Oh,
solid.
wow.
But man,
Wow.
Elliot, if you ever come to our house, like you would go crazy at the amount of music that my dad has. But
Amazing.
he's got recordings from everything. So he has, and it was always playing in our house, always, especially on the weekends. He had these huge Bose speakers and he would just set them up. And whether he was playing a reel to reel or cassettes or records or whatever, it would just be through the whole house. That was the background music. So it could be
Oh, I
anything
love it.
from soundtracks from Bollywood films, mostly in the 50s and 60s, because my parents were very, very snobbish. So like at a certain point, they were like,
The golden years. Yeah.
exactly. So it could be that,
Yeah.
any Indian classical music. So the greats like, Zakir Hussain, Ali Akbar Khan, like Bhimsen Joshi, Hari Prasad, like all those names are names that I know. And I'm familiar with all their music because my dad always had it on. So that certainly was stuff that I was thinking about. But I was also thinking about, I think the biggest influence was the music from Satyajit Ray films. And I came to his films in a very odd way in that I'm a huge Wes Anderson film. I love his film Darjeeling Limited. That's a film that I probably watched a lot of times while I was writing these books purely for the soundtrack, which is all pulled from Satyajit Ray films. He said that like he cribbed the music because he wanted to honor one of, the people he admired in film. And so the movies that music is coming from is this great one called Bombay Talkie, which you have to watch. It's the 60s movie with Sashi Kapoor, and there's this dance sequence where this woman is like jumping on the keys of a giant typewriter, like she and the hero.
Oh my God.
And it's called Typewriter Tip, 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 and it's in Darjeeling Limited. But then also this incredible classical music pulled from the Apu trilogy, the Pattar Panchali movies, if you've seen those, which is like both at times melancholy, at times kind of very frenetic and urgent, just like the perfect soundtrack, I think, for the kind of different scenes that I was writing. So that was the type of music that was really on my mind. But what I want to know, Elia, because I'm the one talking to a music expert, I want to know what music the book made you think of, or more importantly, when you were in Banaras, what kind of music the city makes you think of.
That's an interesting question because I have never had such an auditory experience as being in Banaras. It is like uh, to draw, I don't know an expression in American, but to draw from the Welsh side of my family, it is full on. It is it
Yeah.
is full on there because it's there's horns going all the time. In India, people beep to let you know they're there. You're not beeping to say get out of my way. It's beeping to say here I am in relation to your vehicle. There's cows coming down the wrong way in the street and they're mooing, and there's people hawking wares, and it's very full on in this incredible way. And so I think my main thought about music when you ask about it contextualized there is music that I would hear a lot of Bollywood stuff coming out of shops,
Yeah.
because that's the main way you hear music there, right? It's spilling out of shops, and they're competing, right? So it's like one shop is playing this and the next one's playing this, and all this stuff is happening. There's lines of pilgrims that go for miles to get into the temple, and it's all happening at once. So that's sort of my main recollection of it. But also there's beautiful ceremonies that open and close the day, sort of, right? So at sunrise and at sunset, there are these fire ceremonies where um, folks wake up the river and sort of put her back to bed, as I understand it. And there's musical elements to that in this funny way that they're blasting through these terrible old speakers at the main ghat there, where they do the biggest fire ceremony. They're blasting sort of prayer music, and ringing. It's got to be thousands of bells at once. So it's cacophonous, but it's so cacophonous. It's almost like other spiritual experiences where like you hear a gospel choir and you feel it inside your body. And you feel it inside your body on the banks of the Ganga there. So it's sort of tactile in that way too. Yeah, yeah. I I wish I had maybe a more concrete example of a concert I saw or anything like that, but I didn't there. It was all just encountered throughout, throughout the day.
No, that's great though, right?
Uh,
Because it's like a part of your experience that is its own separate element. Because I was also thinking when you were talking about like the various things being yelled through the street, because Benares is not just a Muslim city, I mean, a Hindu city, it's also a Muslim city. It's very, very important to
mhm.
Muslims as well. So like hearing the call, the 5 times a day call to prayer
Oh
as
yeah,
well,
yeah.
I'm sure you were hearing. And the
Oh, I
bells
love
going
it. Yeah,
off and just all
yeah.
of it. The thing about the car honking is I find it, I know in America, like honking a car, that's a very belligerent, aggressive, angry sound. I find it so comforting whenever I hear a car honking because I think of India and like the endless, because really Elia put it perfectly. When you hear a car, Elia, you were saying I am here, perhaps in the positional sense. It really is an existential thing too. You're honking to be like, I am here. I am here.
I
Like,
exist.
exactly.
Yes.
I exist. Like,
Yeah.
you instead of a turn signal, you honk your horn. You're braking, honk your horn. You're going, honk your horn. Like you're just sitting
It's so
there,
true.
honk your horn. And I
Yeah.
just find it that's why when I don't go to New York frequently, but whenever I have, I find it so comforting to hear that. It's because it just feels like it's not somebody being angry. It's I'm here. And in my heart, I'm like, oh, you're here. I'm here too. We're all here together collectively.
I'm surprised we haven't heard anything. I'm in my
I did
broadcast
hear one.
studio, which is, oh, did you hear
Yeah,
one?
I heard
Okay.
one a couple of
Yeah,
minutes ago and I was like, ah.
because there are a couple big avenues outside my window. I want to take a moment for our viewers to let you guys know in about 3, 4, 5 minutes, we're gonna open the DMs so you can put some questions for Priyanka in there. You can ask me about hosting radio or Pitchfork, I think, but it's a total waste of your time.
No, it isn't.
Ask our rock star author here questions about her book. I actually had a question for you, Priyanka, about the name of Shankar Bhavan related to music. I wondered, because Ravi Shankar is one of the great sons of Varanasi, did you name Shankar Bhavan after him?
No, I did not.
No. Okay.
So there are several real death hostels are real, as I know you know, but for folks out there in the
Mhm.
audience, they are a real, and there are more than a couple in the city. But the most famous one is called Mukti Bhavan. That's the one that people have written ethnographies about. There's been movies about them, and Mukti essentially
Documentary. Yeah.
means salvation. Like, so that it's essentially a very rough translation is house of salvation, house of liberation. So I didn't obviously wasn't going to take that name because I didn't want the one that I've made up is totally fictional. It doesn't exist to my
Hmm.
knowledge. But Banaras is the city of Shiv, which is the destroyer within the Hindu
Hmm.
trinity. And Shankar,
Shiva, as Americans may know. Yeah,
yes,
Shiva.
yes, yes, yeah, thank you. And Shankar is another name. In the book I refer to the great god,
Hmm.
Shankar, great god, Shiva, all of that, exactly referring to
Ah, okay.
all of the same. Yeah. I mean, there's so many cool stories. We could go down so many rabbit holes, Elliot, but one of the cool things about Benares, one of the many, many cool things about the city is that they say it has this effect because of where it sits. If you've seen like familiar iconography of Shiva is always holding a trident, and they say the
Hmm.
city actually sits on one of the points of the trident. And so
Mm.
because of its placement, time doesn't exist in the city. And that
Hmm.
effect that is one of the reasons they say it has this effect where if you die there, you'll be freed from that cycle of reincarnation because of all of these other little things, big things, actually.
And it is amazing when you're there. I mean, just the paintings of Shiva. First of all, there's like these water towers that are got to be 100 feet tall, painted with Shiva. And I want to say his wife Parvati was on the other one. You also see their son Ganesh all over the place, which is the elephant god for viewers who may have seen that. But Shiva is absolute. I mean, you see the sadhus, these
Yeah.
sort of how would you say it, Frank?
Aesthetic.
They're sort of,
Aesthetics. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
ascetic priests
Yeah.
who carry these tridents, and oftentimes they're like really cheap plastic tridents.
Yeah.
It's interesting, but then sometimes they're like metal forged
Yeah.
pieces, and it's both sort of evocative and could be slightly intimidating, except at least I didn't feel worried or anything that,
Yeah.
yeah, but they are like sharpened weapons, some of these.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
wild, it's
and one of the biggest, I don't know if you were actually there for this, but one of the biggest festivals in the city is the Kumbh Mela, which I believe is a festival entirely, I think it takes place during Shivratri, which is this festival season associated with Shiva. But all of these ascetics who are dedicated or devoted specifically to Shiva, exactly as you've described, they'll be covered in ash, these incredible dreadlocks. Some of them might even have snakes. I don't know if you have I think I've seen pictures of that, with the tridents as you describe. And it's this time where they'll all just kind of converge on the Ghats. There are so many, one of the very, Hinduism is just such a wide spanning religion in terms of denominations and practice and, with the gods and the goddesses, etc. But there are so many also different forms of worship. So that folks who decide to go that route, that's a very specific type of worship that they've decided to dedicate their lives to.
I should add, you talk about them being covered in ash, and that ash is actually from the funeral pyre. So it's a very intense interaction with death
Yeah.
in that city. That is very powerful, and also for someone like me coming over for the first time, it was the first time I saw the funeral at Manakarnika, I had a sort of visceral reaction, and I felt quite ill, just because I'd never, because in the West, death is hidden, and if there's a cremation, you go into one room, and the body goes into another room, and you're presented with a little bowl of ashes at the end, but it's not the case there, and and so yeah. I know we have some questions that'll be coming in, so I just want to say the floor is open there, and we'll welcome back our hosts here for that.
Thank you both so much. This has been absolutely fascinating, a wonderful event so far. I got a question that was in the DMs, and they asked, Priyanka, you mentioned that the book has also been published in India. Can you tell us more about how it's been received there?
Yeah.
That's a wonderful note you got.
I was very lucky. They simultaneously published, so Penguin India published it and gave it this beautiful other cover. I was terrified of the India publication. Like, I knew it was going to be coming out on the same day that the American hardcover was going to be coming out. And of course, I think any author is always very, very trepidatious. Any artist is going to be trepidatious about how their work is going to be received. America, fine, whatever. Maybe people will read this book. I don't know. India, oh my goodness, because they would know. Like they would know. Like, I out of everybody, every audience I could conceive of, I felt my nakedest in front of an Indian audience, because that was the audience I had the most to prove to. I was coming in, I saw myself as an interloper. I think I mentioned earlier, coming in and taking very strange ownership over this incredibly iconic city, and deciding to just make up a story that was centered there. And who was I to do that? So I was really, really trepidatious about it. And luckily or unluckily, one of the pandemic silver linings is we've all been able to do all of these virtual events. So that meant I was able to do virtual events in India when I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And I remember one of my first ones was when the book first came out, and I was terrified. And they could not have been more kind, more nice, more lovely. And that reaction has just continued on, again, through the magic of social media, through these DMs that I'll get on Instagram or on Facebook, or, people will find my agent's email and then send an email through there. And it's incredibly humbling and incredibly gratifying, because my intention was always to come at this with the best intentions, essentially, to just tell everybody I'm trying my best, but I know I got things wrong. So forgive me for the things that I got wrong, but I really did come to this without, any sort of bad energy in mind. And they have embraced it. It was like long listed for a prize, a literature prize in India. There's just so many lovely things that came out of it, which were really a surprise to me, utterly. I felt lucky enough to get a publishing deal in the United States. So then to have this additional gift of a publishing deal in India, and then to have this wonderfully warm reaction on top of it, were just more than anything I expected.
So to all of you publishers who passed on this on its journey, you messed up.
Oh my God.
You messed up. Someone else is eating your lunch. And it's
Actually,
delicious.
that ties in really well to a question that's waiting in our list that we got, which is, can you tell us more about your journey to getting this book published?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I had mentioned earlier in talking to Elia that it was rejected by basically everybody. And I had gone the traditional route. So I do have a fantastic agent, Lee Feldman. And we tried really hard. And it was a book that Lee really, really believed in. And we submitted it for about 2 years. And we got lovely rejection letters back in terms of, we love everything about Priyanka's writing, but we don't think we can take this book on. We don't know how it's going to fit. Essentially, we don't know how to sell it, but let us know when Priyanka writes another book. So that was the gist of most of the letters that we got. And we basically got to a point where I had the conversation with my agent where, as hard as it was, maybe it's time to shelve this book and I need to move on with my writing life, because we tried, we did everything we could, but it's just not happening. About half a year later, after that conversation, I was on a creative writing listserv and I got an email message about the Restless Books Writing Prize for New Immigrant Writing. And, part of the prize package was publication. And I looked up their catalog and they made beautiful books. And the judge for this contest was Taya Obret, who also writes about death quite widely and brilliantly. And I thought, she likes folk tales and death. Maybe she'll like my book too. And I have nothing to lose. The book is already written. All I have to do is send it in. Let's see what happens. And maybe 9 months later, I got an email message that I had won. And it still remains the absolute shock of my life that I won, because when you go through rejection for that long, we were thoroughly rejected by everybody. You eventually, it wasn't me submitting to the contest because I thought I had a chance. It was me submitting to the contest because I had been presented with a door by the universe. And I felt like it was my responsibility to knock on that door, even though I fully assumed nobody was going to answer it. I just had to knock. That was my only job. And then just move on. The fact that they not only answered that door, but welcomed me with open arms to walk through that door. I mean, I can't even convey, how humbling that entire experience was. So that was how the book was published. And soon after, this is the funny part to me, and for all the aspiring writers out there or folks who are hoping to be published, it's really, really important to remember that publication is not the ultimate validation, because it is entirely fickle. I mentioned that quite a few Indian publishers had rejected me. After I got this book deal with Restless Books, one of those Indian publishers that had previously rejected me picked me up quite immediately. So, and that's why the book ended up being in India. So again, to say that rejection is not about the quality of your work, I think it really is often about a time and a place and a person and circumstances that you're entirely not in your control at all.
Thank you. There's a question. Was there anything that you learned in your research that you loved but couldn't, or didn't wind up in the final manuscript?
There were so many things. And Elia, you showing me this, like the elephant on that beautiful silken elephant, and the fact that, Prakash, your virtual tour guide, is from a family of weavers. Banaras is such just a hotbed of Indian artisans of all types and stripes. And certainly, weaving is one of the big things. Like for a woman to have a Banarasi silk sari, that's like a prestige piece, like an heirloom that would be passed down from daughter to daughter to daughter. And I am a knitter. I'm, a maker myself. So I'm all about learning about all of these different types of crafts. So I did, and I watched videos and I did all of that. But I couldn't figure out how to fit a detailed description of how you warp a loom and do all of that. In the book, that would have made zero sense. So, I was able to mention a weaver alley and the potter's alley and the woodworker alley, and to do all of that. But I wasn't able to indulge all of my DIY sensibilities in being able to just describe all of those things. But so many things so many stories, like, just like even in the ethnographies, it would be great to read all these like little bits of gossip that the ethnographer had captured. And what was really fun for me was coming up with my own gossip to put in the book, because of course I couldn't like crib theirs, but I could make up my own gossip, and that was a lot of fun.
I'm going to put a pin in gossip just in case we have time for another question or two from me at the end. And if not, of course, no problem.
Yeah, we have one more audience question. We can do that. And then Elia, we can wrap up with yours right after that. So the last audience question is, you described your writing process as organic. Can you tell us more about what that organic process entails?
It is like in Shawshank Redemption at the end, where he is digging through a concrete wall with a spoon and there's no light and he doesn't know where he's going, but Lord, he hopes he's going the right way. It really, really is entirely like that. I mean, Elia, you might already know, but this book from start to finish, it took 10 years to write. And the reason for that, I mean, one of the practical reasons is I work full time. So I was only writing, in the evenings and on weekends. The other reason with that is I didn't know where I was going. So it's like you get in a car and you started to drive, and there's all these like opportunities of branching forks in the road. And I don't know, I'll take this one. And then you get to a dead end, turn right back around. Let's try this one. I mean, it's just a lot of trial and error and really putting your ego in the closet. Yeah, that was a great, beautiful paragraph I wrote, but it is doing nothing for the story. So it's got to go, just making those really kinds of hard choices. And I think really the motivation for me personally that keeps me going in that kind of situation is just the fun of discovery. So what I like to say is hopefully the experience that a first-time reader has with this book of just wanting to turn the pages to find out what happens next, that's the experience I had when I was writing it. I was writing to find out what happens next because I truly didn't know. There were very few future plot points where I actually knew what was going to happen. There were maybe 2, and Elia, I'll tell you what they are afterwards, but there were only 2. Otherwise, everything about the book was a surprise, but that's what made it fun, figuring out what those surprises were.
Amazing. I can't believe you wrote this epic, discovering it as it unfolded. That's really something to think on.
I was in my 20s then, Elia. That's why.
Yeah. The energy that maybe eludes us
I
now.
know, the energy.
So I have 2 quick questions for you, and just acknowledging our time, we have about 7 minutes. But one is to pull that pin out of gossip. I wrote a question to ask you because I've read the book twice now. I read it, you and I became friendly, and then when you invited me to chat with you here, I read it again, and it was so cool to see it with the lens of knowing the story and being able to focus on details in a different way, not being caught up on what's going to happen and having to page turn in the same way I did the first time. But it struck me that throughout human history, gossip has been used as sort of a malicious, maligning, lacerating action, right? But also as this really powerful and important way of people informing each other about who's reliable, what is safe, who isn't safe. Yeah. And gossip is this powerful through line throughout the novel, and it comes up in so many different ways and at different times. I wonder, like, what drew you to gossip originally, and what purpose you wanted it to serve in your narrative?
Yeah, I think what drew me to it originally was just, during my travels in India, I am not a fluent speaker of Gujarati, which is my parents' home language, nor am I a fluent speaker of Hindi. So when we would be going to people's houses or in shops or whatever, I was effectively mute. I can understand quite a bit of it, about 80% of it, but I was never confident in my speaking ability because it relies on formal tense, et cetera. So I was afraid of just offending somebody. So I would just say nothing. But when you shut down one sense, it opens up another sense. And it was incredible the stuff I would hear. Because I think when I wouldn't talk, people would just assume that I also couldn't understand. So I'd hear all these amazing things and I just loved it. I loved the vibration in the air. I loved that I had no idea who these people were. And yet I was like hearing these stories about them, like, you know, and I was never going to hear from them again. I was never going to meet them or see them, but I just loved it. It made me feel like I was part of just living, you know, like just being able to be in it. And for me, that is the joyful part about gossip. And the when gossip is not harmful is when it's like people constantly poking at each other. I think Gujaratis are known as people who are constantly making fun of each other, but it's like your turn could be next. You know, everybody has their turn at some point. So it's very fun, and hopefully it's harmless. But I was intensely interested in how it can be made harmful, and how something that initially is a very, very mild comment that really has nothing to do with anything, through the mouths of however many people telling that story and transforming it, each of those people is adding their minuscule layer to it. So by the end, it can become something that can destroy an entire family. And that
it's totally mutated.
Exactly. It totally mutates. And not only that, it's, I think each person contributing it, they're contributing at such a small level that they wouldn't think they're doing anything harmful. But by the time you get to the end, it's like a nuclear bomb, and you can just annihilate an entire generation of a family metaphorically, in terms of ruining a girl's prospects for marriage, in terms of, you know, ruining a man's prospects for business. Like, obviously these are very gendered stereotypes of things, but you know, within the community that I was writing about, these are the options that are available to men and women. And that was really, really interesting to me. And I just wanted to see that through. I wanted to see that transformation through, both in seeing how it had affected a family in the past, and also seeing it in action. So the reader sees what the actual real truth is, but then they also see how it becomes really, really dangerous. And they see that whole transformation to really understand how it got from point A to point B.
And you are definitely, as an aside on that, you are definitely a master of making us think one thing about a character and then sort of revealing with empathy the human experience, the lived experience that brought them to who they are, and also that brought perceptions of them that may or may not be true. And that happens many times throughout the novel. I want to end on this question, Priyanka, which is, you spent 10 years with this city. Are you going to go there ever?
You know, we've talked about this, Elia, and I don't know. I will say, so very, very upfront, if there's any wealthy individual out there who would like to be my patron and subsidize my trip, I will never say no, ever. I really will never. You know, I'm somebody who likes to think of myself. I'll always say yes. I'll try anything. But when I think about it, really, really, really think about it, like if I had to make a choice myself, am I going to travel there? That's a hard question, because I've written about a city that really is entirely in my head. Maybe this version or parts of this version existed in real life at one point, but as you know, it's changing rapidly with the, you know, the current government in place. You know, things are being raised down, new buildings are going up. Beauty of Banaras has always been that it looks incredibly old, but really in truth, it's not that old at all. It is constantly changing and going through this metamorphosis. You know, the spiritual part of me thinks perhaps it would be a good idea to go, because it is something that's so important within the religion. But then there's another part of me that says, well, we can be content with the one that we wrote about. That's okay too. So I'd never say no if presented with the opportunity, but I don't know.
TBD.
Yeah.
Well, Priyanka, thank you so much, both for inviting me to speak with you and for this absolutely beautiful novel. As you know, I talk about it every chance I get. I've recommended it to countless people, so it's been such a blessing to get to chop it up with you here. And thank you for hosting us, Rachel and David. This has been gorgeous.
This has been awesome. Elia, you're awesome. I'm so glad we finally got to have this conversation. And Northshire Books, Rachel and David, thank you so much for having both of us.
Of course. Thank you both so much for the book and the wonderful event. You can order City of Good Death from northshire.com. And we'll see you at another Northshire Presents sometime soon. Have a great night, everyone.
Have a good one.
Thanks and good night.